This presentation covers the anatomy and physiology of the human eye by Jacob McGinnis, developed from the Essentials of Ophthalmic Nursing by the American Society of Ophthalmic Registered Nurses. Our learning objectives are to identify the primary anatomical components of the visual system, describe the physiologic functions of the anatomical structures of the visual system, identify the extraocular muscles and their normal anatomy and physiology, list the cranial nerves associated with the visual system function, identify general architectural elements of the ocular orbit, list arterial and venous components of the circulatory system of the eye and associated structures, and to discuss key factors in the physiology of vision. Knowledge of the anatomy and physiology of the eyes, eyelids, and orbit are fundamental to the overall comprehension of the pathophysiology of ocular conditions. This understanding is essential for guiding evaluation and treatment and applying interventions to patients with acute or chronic ocular pathology. Surface anatomy of the eye contains the eyelids, the eyelashes, the palpebral fissure, and the conjunctiva. 5 distinct layers of the eyelids: the skin, the orbicularis oculi muscle, which encircles the entire orbit, the orbital septum, which is a fibrous layer extending across the anterior opening of the orbit, a layer of fat that acts as insulation, and the tarsal plate, which is a tough cartilaginous layer and provides support to the eyelid. The lid retractors and conjunctiva complete the sections of the eyelids. The eyelids are movable folds of skin that cover the external eye. They blink about 4 to 6 times per minute, and their primary purpose is to protect the eyes from injury and excessive light, and to help spread the tear film over the cornea. The upper eyelid extends from the lash line to the eyebrow and moves freely over the entire anterior ocular surface. It has more movement than the lower eyelid. When the eye is open and in a neutral position, the upper eyelid covers approximately 1 millimeter of the superior corneal limbus. The upper eyelid is lifted by the levator palpebrae superioris muscle, which is innervated by the ocular motor nerve, or cranial nerve 3. The orbicularis oculi, which runs in a circular fashion around the eyelids, provides closure during activities such as winking and blinking. This muscle can close forcefully, and manual attempts to open it can be particularly difficult, sometimes almost impossible. The orbicularis oculi muscle is innervated by cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve. The lower eyelid extends from the lash line to the skin of the upper cheek. There is no visible line of demarcation where the lower eyelid ends. It rises slightly when the eye is closed. The edge of the lower eyelid rests at the inferior margin of the corneal limbus. The lid margin is approximately 2 millimeters wide. Eyelashes emerge from the anterior edge, and there are normally about 200 eyelashes per eye. The posterior border is close to the surface of the eye, placing the inferior puncta in a position that easily facilitates tear drainage into the nasal lacrimal duct. If looked at closely, a gray line can be seen that runs the length of the lower eyelid and marks the center between the anterior and posterior edges. The palpebral fissure is the space between the upper and lower eyelids that appears when the eyelids are open. This fissure measures about 30 millimeters wide and 7 to 12 millimeters high. The cornea, iris, pupil, sclera, and bulbar conjunctiva are visible in the palpebral fissure. The conjunctiva is a mucous membrane that lines the upper and lower eyelids and extends over the sclera to the corneal margin. It contains lymphoid tissue, which provides some immunology protection. It is innervated by cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal nerve, and the portion of the conjunctiva that covers the sclera is termed the bulbar conjunctiva. The portion covering the inner surface of the eyelids is termed the palpebral conjunctiva. Tear production and drainage. The lacrimal gland is located in the superior lateral aspect of the eyelid below the eyebrow. It secretes a watery or aqueous tear and produces about 0.2 milliliters of tears in a 24-hour period. Aqueous tears flow downward and inward toward the tear drainage system at the inner canthus. In addition to aqueous tears, several glands located in the conjunctiva, called the glands of Zeiss, Moll, Wolfing, and Krauss, secrete sticky or mucosal tears. In addition to that, the Momobian glands, located in the eyelid near the tarsal plate, secrete an oily tear. These three types of tears provide moisture and protection to the surface of our eye. With each blink, tears are pushed across the eye towards the puncta located at the medial junction of the upper and lower eyelids. From the puncta, tears are pushed into the caniculi and then into the lacrimal sac. They are drained from the lacrimal sac and nasal lacrimal duct to the inside of the nose and down the throat. Tear film has three distinct layers. The outermost layer is secreted by the Momobian glands. This provides an oily or lipid layer, which prevents evaporation of the underlying tear layers, keeping the cornea continually moist. The middle layer consists of aqueous tears from the lacrimal gland. These tears provide nutrients that help sustain the health of the cornea. And the innermost layer is composed of mucus, which provides stability to the tear film as well as lubrication and also functions to trap and remove debris. Anterior chamber anatomy. The cornea is a round, convex, avascular tissue that is continuous with the sclera. The junction of the cornea and the sclera is called the limbus. The cornea is approximately 12 millimeters in diameter, 1 millimeter thick at the periphery, and 0.5 millimeters thick at the center. It's responsible for 70% of the eye's refractive power. It's innervated by cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal nerve. The cornea has over 5,000 nerve endings, making it one of the most sensitive areas of the body. Having a small grain of sand or dust on the cornea can result in extreme pain. The cornea has 5 distinct layers. The epithelium, or the outermost layer, is about 5 to 6 cell layers thick. The epithelium is quite capable of regenerating itself after trauma and can repair itself in about 24 hours without scarring. Below that is Bowman's membrane, the second layer. It is acellular and clear and does not regenerate, which means that if a wound is deep enough, that is where scarring can occur. The stroma is the third layer and provides about 90% of the cornea's thickness. It has a uniform structure necessary for transparency. It also scars when damaged. The fourth layer, or Descemet's membrane, is elastic and transparent. And the innermost layer is the endothelium, is only one cell layer thick. It regulates corneal dehydration, which is essential for transparency. When endothelial cells are damaged, the surrounding cells slide in to repair the defect. The aqueous humor. Located between the cornea and lens, the aqueous humor fills the anterior chamber. It is produced by the ciliary body at a rate of approximately 1 to 2 millimeters cubed per minute. It is clear and colorless as it bathes the corneal endothelium and lens, providing them with nutrients. In the anterior chamber, the aqueous humor travels through the trabecular meshwork, located at the angle of the iris where it encircles the anterior chamber. Its rate of exit is the most important factor in regulating intraocular pressure. Lastly, it flows into the canal of Schlemm and then into the episcleral veins to exit the eye. The uveal tract is composed of three structures: the iris, the ciliary body, and the choroid. The iris is the most anterior portion of the uveal tract, and it arises from the ciliary body and separates the anterior and posterior chambers of the eye. It forms the colored part of the eye, and iris pigment is usually deposited by age 1. In the center of the iris is the pupil. Two muscles, the sphincter and the dilator, regulate the dilation and constriction of the pupil. The sphincter contracts to constrict the pupil, and it relaxes when the pupil is dilated and is controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system. The dilator muscle, which is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, dilates the pupil. The ciliary body is continuous with the iris, and it is adherent to the sclera. The most anterior portion of the ciliary body, the pars placata, produces aqueous humor. It connects to the lens by the zonular fibers called the zonules of Zinn. These are made of fine suspensory ligaments arising from the ciliary body. The pars plana is the posterior segment of the ciliary body. The pars plana meets the anterior retina 4 millimeters behind the corneal rim. The ciliary muscle is adjacent to the sclera. It is composed of longitudinal, radial, and circular fibers. These constrict and relax tension on the zonules of Zinn, reshaping the lens for distance and near vision. The ability of the lens to focus or accommodate is controlled by cranial nerve 3, the ocular motor nerve. Choroid is a honeycomb-shaped vascular structure of blood vessels ranging in size. The small blood vessels make up the first layer and are called the choriocapillaries. The medium and large vessels are sandwiched between two layers, Bruch's membrane and the lamina fuchsia. The choroid is responsible for providing nourishment and waste elimination for the retina. Crystalline lens is a biconvex refractile body enclosed within a capsule. It is transparent and consists of 65% water and 35% proteins with some trace minerals. It is 4 millimeters thick and 9 to 10 millimeters in diameter and is attached to the ciliary body by the zonules of Zinn. The ciliary muscles' contraction and relaxation causes changes in the lens shape. This process, called accommodation, enables the lens to decrease or increase its focusing power. The lens has three distinct segments. The outer layer, called the capsule, is an elastic, transparent structure, sometimes called the bag. The middle layer, or the cortex, forms the peripheral body of the lens and is a soft and putty-like structure and consistency. The center of the lens is the nucleus. The lens continually produces new lens fibers that push older fibers to the center, causing it to become harder and denser with age. The posterior chamber anatomy. Vitreous, or the vitreous humor, is a clear, jelly-like, transparent, and avascular substance that occupies the posterior two-thirds of the eye behind the crystalline lens. 99% of it is water, and the remaining substances are collagen and hyaluronic acid. It's encapsulated by the hyaloid membrane, or the vitreous cortex, and it helps maintain the eye's shape. It also has minimal refractive power. Retina. The retina is a semi-transparent neural tissue. The central retinal artery, and the choroid provide nourishment to the retina. It is attached firmly at the ora serrata, the optic nerve, and to the underlying choroid by pigment epithelium. It contains all light-sensitive receptor cells and responds automatically to changes in light level to regulate the iris. It records and processes images and possesses sensitivity covering a range of 10 million graded light levels. The retina is composed of central nervous system tissue. It contains the eye's sensory receptors, called rods and cones. There are roughly 6 million cones in the retina. They function best in brightly lit situations and can discern 150 different colors. There are 3 types of photopigments, one each for red, green, and blue. Damage to the macula and fovea directly results in loss of color in central vision because this is where the cones are densest in the eye. The other photoreceptor cell found in the retina is the rod. There are approximately 125 million rods present in the retina. They are mostly spread throughout the periphery, but there are none present in the fovea. They are responsible for discerning black, white, and gray, and function best in dimly lit situations. They do require about 30 minutes to adapt to the absence of light. Each rod contains a substance called rhodopsin, or visual purple, that acts as a chemical amplifier, increasing vision in dimly lit situations. Rhodopsin is broken down by light and must be continuously synthesized. Vitamin A is the main component of rhodopsin. We can divide the retina into 2 main layers: the retinal pigment epithelium and the neurosensory retinal layer. Pigment epithelium is directly adjacent to the choroid and is a single layer of cells containing melanin. The neural layer consists of several layers. They are the photoreceptors, external limiting membrane, outer nuclear layer, outer plexiform layer, inner nuclear layer, inner plexiform layer, ganglion cell layer, and the internal limiting membrane. There are 3 main regions to the retina: the ora serrata, the peripheral retina, and the macula. The ora serrata is the most anterior region of the retina. This region has scallop-shaped extensions and indentations of pigmented tissue that border the pars plana. The peripheral retina contains mainly rod receptor cells. There are a small number of cones present. It is responsible for the peripheral visual field. Damage to the peripheral retina may result in night blindness and the loss of peripheral vision. Macula, defined by these 2 large veins called the arcades, is typically seen on direct ophthalmic examination. This area is sometimes called the posterior pole and consists of the posterior retina, which includes the macula, this area called the fovea, the optic nerve head, and the retinal arteries and veins. These vessels converge to form the central retinal artery and the central retinal vein. The macula lutea has a yellow carotenoid pigment present. The term macula lutea, which means yellow spot, is responsible for central vision here, and it is approximately 4.5 millimeters in diameter. The very center of the macula is called the fovea centralis, and it is only 1.5 millimeters in diameter and contains only cone receptor cells. The optic disc is the entry site for cranial nerve 2, the optic nerve. The optic disc, also called the optic nerve head, contains no receptor cells and consequently is referred to as the physiologic blind spot. The fibers of the optic nerve enter through a sieve-like area of the sclera known as the lamina cribosa. These structures form the optic cup. The central retinal artery and vein also enter and exit here and provide the main source of vascular nourishment and elimination. Sclera is a white, fibrous tissue that covers 5/6 of the eye, supporting and giving shape to the eye. It is the insertion site for all the extraocular muscles and is approximately 1 millimeter thick, except where the muscles insert, where it is slightly thinner by about 0.3 millimeters. The episclera is a vascular and elastic layer that covers the anterior sclera. Where the episclera ends, Tennant's capsule begins and covers the remaining area from the limbus to the optic nerve. There are 6 extraocular muscles, 4 rectus or straight muscles, and 2 oblique extraocular muscles. They all help to control eye movement. The muscle cone is surrounded and protected by fat, and each muscle is approximately 40 millimeters long and 10 millimeters wide at the point of insertion. Each muscle is encased in a smooth avascular capsule. Each of the rectus muscles originate at the apex of the orbit. The medial rectus muscle adducts the eye or turns it inward towards the nose. It is innervated by cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve. The lateral rectus abducts the eye or turns it away from the nose. It is innervated by cranial nerve 6, the abducens nerve. The superior rectus muscle elevates the eye and is also innervated by cranial nerve 3. And the inferior rectus muscle depresses the eye. It is also innervated by cranial nerve 3. The superior oblique muscle is approximately 40 millimeters in length and originates from the periosteal covering of the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone. It is composed of muscle from the point of origin to the trochlea and entirely of tendon from the trochlea onward. The trochlea deflects the superior oblique muscle downward, lateral, and posterior to its insertion site. It intorts and depresses the eye, and it is innervated by cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve. The inferior oblique muscle originates from the periosteal covering of the orbital plate of the maxilla. Composed entirely of muscle tissue, it travels from its point of origin laterally and posteriorly, curving underneath the globe of the eye. It extorts and elevates the eye and is innervated by cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve. The optic nerve is the second cranial nerve 2. It transmits impulses from the retina to the brain. Approximately 1.5 millimeters in diameter, it contains about 1 million axons. It's about 25 to 30 millimeters in length from the eye to the point of passage through the optic foramen. It is about 4 to 10 millimeters long from the optic foramen to the optic chiasm, and it has no sensory receptors. It is the physiological blind spot. It is visible on ophthalmic examination and is the only cranial nerve that can be directly observed. When it passes through the lamina cribosa, it divides into nasal and temporal bundles. The nerve fibers from the temporal retina of each eye remain uncrossed. Fibers from the right half of each eye, or the left visual field, carry impulses to the right occipital lobe. Fibers from the left half of each eye, or the right visual field, carry impulses to the left occipital lobe. The optic tract begins at the chiasm. The fiber's endpoint is the geniculate body. The visual cortex is located in the striate area of the occipital lobe. It is here that conscious recognition of nerve impulses occurs. There are several cranial nerves that affect the globe, orbit, and facial areas surrounding the eye and eyelids. The optic nerve, or cranial nerve 2, of course, is the mainstay of vision. It is responsible for transmitting messages from the retina to the brain. The oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3, innervates the medial, inferior, and superior rectus muscles. It also innervates the inferior oblique, the levator, ciliary, and sphincter muscles. Cranial nerve 4, the trochlear, innervates the superior oblique muscle. Cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal, has 3 sections. Only 2 affect the eye. Its lacrimal branch innervates the lacrimal gland, conjunctiva, and skin of the upper eyelid. The frontal branch innervates the skin of the forehead and the brow. The nasal ciliary branch innervates the cornea, iris, ciliary body, sclera, and the choroid. And the infraorbital branch innervates the cheek and lower eyelid. Cranial nerve 6, the abducens nerve, innervates the lateral rectus muscle, and cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve, innervates the orbicularis oculi muscle. The parasympathetic system affects pupillary constriction, the ciliary muscle, the sphincter, and the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3. The sympathetic nervous system is activated by the release of norepinephrine and affects the trabecular meshwork, the dilator muscle, and the uveal blood vessels. The ocular orbit is approximately 40 millimeters in height, width, and depth. The volume is about 30 milliliters. It is spherical in shape and is made of bony composition with a lining of muscle, connective tissue, and fat. Periosteum lines the orbit and adheres to bones along the sutures. The orbital septum supports the structure of the eyelids. It prevents fat from entering and helps restrict inflammation of the eyelids. Tenin's capsule is a sheath that encapsulates the globe, making a smooth surface. It separates the globe from orbital fat. A muscular fascia covers the extraocular muscles. The entry point for the optic nerve is at the opening of the orbital apex or canal. The superior orbital fissure is the entry point for cranial nerves 3, 4, 5, and 6. The orbital architecture consists of the frontal, sphenoid, lesser wing of the sphenoid, and greater wing of the sphenoid, zygomatic, lacrimal, ethmoid, palatine, and maxilla bones. Globe is the term used for the entire eyeball. The anterior-posterior diameter is approximately 22 to 26 millimeters long, with an average of 24 millimeters in the adult. It is about 70 to 80 millimeters in circumference. The anterior pole is the center of the cornea. The posterior pole refers to the center of the macula. The equator is an imaginary line encircling the globe and capturing the anterior and posterior poles. Arterial and venous circulation. The ophthalmic artery is the first intracranial branch of the internal carotid artery. It enters the orbit through the optic foramen and travels laterally with the optic nerve, branching many times. The central retinal artery nourishes the optic nerve and the retina. The medial and lateral ciliary arteries nourish the choroid and parts of the optic nerve. The lacrimal artery nourishes the extraocular structures. The external carotid artery branches into the external maxillary, superficial temporal, and internal maxillary arteries, which nourish the eye and the eyelids. The superior and inferior ophthalmic veins have no valves. They are the repository for other venous drainage. The 4 vortex veins drain blood from the choroid, ciliary body, and the iris. In order to have optimal vision, there has to be healthy, intact ocular structures. Our refractive media, including the cornea, lens, and vitreous, must be clear. The eyes must be in proper alignment, parallel to each other, and symmetrically set in the orbits. Our extraocular muscles must also be in proper alignment. The visual cortex of the brain also has to be functioning normally. Monocular vision is present in about 35% of each individual visual field. The ability for the eyes to fuse two images into a single image, binocular vision, is present in the other 120 degrees of field. Stereopsis is a more refined binocular vision that provides enhanced depth perception. Some special terms. Fixation is the ability of the eyes to look straight ahead together and continuously. For example, someone who has strabismus may not be able to fixate. The accommodative terms convergence and divergence refer to the eye's ability to be drawn together when looking at something near and drawn apart when switching from near to distance vision. The process of accommodation refers to the ability of the lens to change its shape to enable near focus. The normal range of a vision without accommodation is 20 feet. Range of focus is the distance that an object can be from the eyes and remain in focus. In a child, this is approximately 7 centimeters. In a 55-year-old adult, it is approximately 55 centimeters. Pupil function has a major impact on adjusting the amount of light that enters the eye, dependent upon the amount of light present in the environment. When bright, direct, or indirect light is present, the pupil constricts to project the best image onto the surface of the retina. When less light is present, the pupil dilates to allow more light to enter the eye and result in the best visual response from the retina. Pupillary dilation may also occur in response to pain, fear, and other heightened emotions. Identifying the primary anatomical components of the visual system and understanding key factors in the physiology of vision provide the educational basis for learning the field of ophthalmology. This was designed to enhance the nurse's understanding of the anatomy and physiology of the eye, which will enhance understanding of disease processes and other factors that affect the patient's visual outcome. Thank you for following along with this presentation. Here are the references that were used to create this presentation.